on a bit of a different note, and I'm going to start with, it's actually one of my favorite Bible readings, but it speaks to what we're going to be talking about in this next session. It's from Ephesians 3, verses 14 to 20, and I'm going to read it actually from the Message version, because it is one I learnt a long time ago. My response is to get down on my knees before the Father, this magnificent Father who parcels out all heaven and earth. I ask him to strengthen you by his Spirit, not a brute strength, but a glorious inner strength, that he will live in you as you open up the door and invite him in. And I ask him that with both feet planted firmly on love, you'll be able to take in along with all followers of Jesus the extravagant dimensions of Christ's love. Reach out and experience the breadth, test its length, plumb the depths, rise to the heights, live full lives, full in the fullness of God. God can do anything, you know, far more than you could ever imagine or guess or request in your wildest dreams. He does it not by pushing us around, but by working within us, his Spirit deeply and gently within us. Glory to God. The reason I chose that reading is because even in the darkest of times, God's Spirit is at work, not causing catastrophes like COVID, where nearly 4 million people have already died from it, and numerous others impacted on so many levels. But because if we work in partnership with him, we can work towards something that he wants in the future. So, as well as highlighting and exacerbating fault lines and increasing our reliance and involvement on community support, the pandemic's done something else, and quite extraordinary in itself. It's caused us to have a moment to pause in a way that modern society rarely allows us to do. It's caused us to be able to stop and reflect on what we most value. And I would like to suggest that the things that we have yearned for have mostly been relational things, whether with God, with ourselves, in terms of what we need, in terms of being alone or with others, depending on our particular situation. Our relationships with others that we've yearned for. And I would like to suggest that as well as being a time of pandemic, we are in a moment, a Kairos moment. And I'm going to share my screen again. I'm sure most of you are much more trained in the meaning of Kairos. But when I talk about it, what I'm talking about is not the quantity of time, but the meaning of that time. Sometimes referred to as God's time, in parallel with Chronos, normal sort of clock time. It's not just about the passing of time or the changing of seasons. It's about a time that helps change us. One definition I really like is Kairos is the perfect, delicate, crucial moment, the fleeting rightness of time and place that creates the opportune atmosphere for action, words, and movement. A time for godly metamorphosis, transformation. And if you remember that first screen I showed back in the first session of all those trends, even pre-COVID, we can recognize a need for transformation of the way that we live, the way that we hold relationships, the way that we can reconcile long dividing lines in our society, in our churches, in our own lives. As leaders in church, we have a particular responsibility, but we're also very much not just observers of this pandemic. We are living through it ourselves. So all the things that we talk about in terms of helping others, we also need to recognize for ourselves. And I was really pleased to see in the break people talking about connecting and helping one another. And that's exactly what we need to do, because even as leaders, we are affected in much the same way as everybody else. And in fact, in some ways, as leaders who are used to being able to sort of be people that, planners and changes and things, this has been a particularly difficult time. It has been one that has thrown us off. We have not had a sense of being in control in so many ways. So I'd like us to just keep that in mind. But I also like us to think about this time of transition. And when we talk a place for hope about transition, it's the inner journey that goes alongside the outer changes that are happening for us. And I'd like to share a quote from Ruth Harvey, who was the previous director of Place for Hope and is now the leader of the Iona community. Living and leading through times of change and transition is core to the calling of the gospel and to the work of the church. The Easter story, leading us from lament and grief through the time of emptiness and waiting to an experience of hope for the future, is central to the Christian faith. This is a pattern also present in times of change and transition, and I'm sure you would agree, certainly at this time, and in times of conflict and reconciliation. In the work of Place for Hope, we are increasingly noticing the opportunities embedded in such change and transition for mission, for transformation, for reconciliation. And this diagram gives a sense of that inner journey of transition that we often make when change is happening around us. There's that sense of something ending, of needing to let go, even if it's in the sense of the pandemic, letting go of being able to be in control of how we live our lives. And then there's the new future. But in the middle is what in this diagram is called the neutral zone. It's a messy place. As human beings, we like to have much more certainty. In the neutral zone, we are between letting go and whatever the new future has. But as leaders, we need to help people and ourselves to be able to sit for a while in this neutral zone. And to be honest, in the pandemic, we don't have much choice. I mean, we're sitting betwixt and between anyway. But to make the most of it, to see this as a kairos moment, to hear what God is saying to us in this time, where we have very little control over so many things. The danger in the neutral zone, the challenges in it, is that because we don't like being in that place, there's a lot of anxiety. Our motivation could fall, our productivity is, as we probably already recognized when we were talking about our emotional state in the pandemic. But it also can open up old wounds and dividing lines that have long been there, but open them afresh. People can feel overloaded because they don't have a clarity about the future, and tensions can rise, and time just seems to go on forever. We still don't know when those restrictions are going to end, and when we truly feel like there's no threat from COVID. But there's opportunity in that place of kairos, in that neutral zone, of sitting there in the I don't know and listening to God, to be able to sit and reflect, to try new things as we've all done in our churches. How do we worship? How can worship look different? How is our church different? How are we being the church differently? To try them, to experiment, not to choose what necessarily is going to be the right way in the future, but to try them out. It's a time when we can try lots of things and sit with the uncertainty. And it's important as leaders that we don't try and push people to that next level. And as I said, in the pandemic, it's a bit hard anyway, because we're still determined a lot by what's going on around us. There's a story that Henry Newen tells about going to the circus where there was a flying trapeze, and he was taken in after the circus performance had finished to meet the trapeze artists, the flying Rodleys in this case. And he talked to them, and he was amazed because what they told him was that the person that lets go of their trapeze has just to let go and fly. They cannot be the one that reaches out and grabs the other trapeze artist. If they did that, then it would cause damage to both of them, if not their lives. They have to trust that the other trapeze artist will catch them. And that's the only safe way of doing it. And I love that story because it speaks to the trust that they must have. And when we talk about transition, and as people of faith, we're in that awkward spot of being midair between and betwixt what is certain and what is our future. We don't know yet, and we have to trust that God will catch us. And that's hard. But in some ways, just reading that Marilyn Ferguson quote, it's not so much that we're afraid of change in the old ways, but it's that place in between. It's like being between trapezes. It is not our favorite place. Some people like it more than others, but we dislike uncertainty a lot. So just some reflections from me about what we can expect in terms of as relationships as we emerge from the pandemic. The first one is around the issue of return to freedoms. And strange as it may seem, I think that sometimes the freedom that we have longed for can be overwhelming once it comes. Although most of us have longed for restrictions to end completely and be free to do those things that matter most to us, whether visiting and hugging friends and family, properly farewelling loved ones with others in our family and circle of friends, and farewelling properly those who have died. Being able to travel, play or watch sport, the freedom to do the things we've missed most, also come with a huge array of other choices. It's not unusual after a long period of restricted choices to feel overwhelmed when we have our normal range of choices back. It can be really tiring, and there's a lot of feelings of vulnerability and not feeling safe. Some of us will adapt really quickly. In fact, some of us probably already have, but others will take much longer. And in addition, some may well find it hard to make decisions as to what is really safe given the conditions and others not. Although I suspect that we've all been doing that a little bit for ourselves for a long time in terms of the guidance. In any case, it's important to be understanding and patient both of ourselves and others as we all readjust, each doing it at our own pace. Secondly, is something that I've learned from nearly every country I've worked in after a crisis. And if you can imagine, we would often provide mental health support for people in those countries during and after a crisis, but you can't do that on an individual basis. You're often doing that as whole communities because there is no other way practically to do it. I've again and again witnessed the importance of acknowledging and honouring our experiences of, in any crisis, especially prolonged crises, as an important way both of healing, but of moving forward together. Everyone experiences this pandemic differently, as we've already discussed, both as individuals and as groups, defined by things that have meant that the disease and restrictions have disproportionately impacted us, whether it's in regards to ethnicity, professional living conditions. When the threat of COVID has really receded and restrictions have lifted properly, I suspect we need spaces and opportunities not only to share our stories, what we've all experienced over this time period, whether it's, and the things we've lost, whether it's actual loved ones in terms of people, in terms of our own health, jobs, sense of the security that's been pulled out from underneath our feet, dreams, plans, and a myriad of other losses. We may already have been telling those stories within our own individual circles, but it can also be really important to do that in our wider communities. The risk of not doing so is that the divides that have been entrenched over this time period widen, because we might never understand what neighbours, we make assumptions that they have experienced it like we have, and they will not have. And it's important to also understand that until this crisis and this threat has completely gone, we can never completely process it. And I think most of us have experienced the loss of a loved one, maybe after a long illness. It's probably the closest analogy to it. But you'll know that although you process little bits of grief as you go through that process, it's not until after their passing that you're truly able to grieve what has been lost and gained in the intimacy of that time. There might well be a momentum, a sense that we don't want to linger on the experience of the pandemic once it's over. And it will be over one day, even though it might be messy and not just on one day. But I hope we do linger on it. I hope we get opportunities and make opportunities in our faith communities in some way to honour what has happened, whether that's through putting in a time capsule of things that have meant so much to us in this time, whether it's about a ceremony of honouring people or story circles or a mural or whatever creative way we choose to do it. And then drawing those experiences together and deciding how as a community we want to be different going forward from the lessons we have learned from our different experiences. And I put this one, what has changed, because we often hear that the world will be different once we emerge from it all. But I want to pose the question that often it's not the world that will have changed, it's us in this process that we've gone through. The disconnect may be that we're the ones that are different. And again, using the analogy of losing a loved one, there is a jarring between the world that you once inhabited without too much thought and the person you've become following the death. Sometimes those changes in us are temporary, but others may be much longer held, such as things like we don't want to be as busy as we were before the pandemic. However, it can be really difficult to stay to any life changes you may decide in this period after such a prolonged crisis, because those structures that are already in society will start to re-emerge and expect us to fit back in. And that's where that disconnect may make us feel strange and out of place. This leads me to the mental health and well-being. And I think we've touched on this quite a bit, but it's linked so much to both our relationship with God, ourselves and others, that it's important to think about it again. I was really fortunate to work for 12 years for Médecins Sans Frontières, a medical humanitarian agency. And what I learned over that decade and a bit of an agency that valued mental health and well-being as much as physical health was that as challenging as a prolonged crisis can be to our mental health, it was often after a crisis had passed that mental health actually deteriorated. Now, sometimes that was because after a crisis, people could actually access care. But often it was because people during a crisis understand why they're anxious and depressed or feeling stress, especially if they're able to express why that is. But once a crisis is over and you're still feeling those ways, then you start to think it's you. Until the threat has gone away, we may well continue to feel the same or worse and see that as failure on our part, rather than as still linked to everything that we've gone through but not yet processed. I was so grateful in that time period to be part of teams that encourage safe spaces for discussing mental health and well-being, as much after a national crisis as during it, and not only saw but felt those benefits myself. I just hope that as leaders in church that we recognise that we may well feel the impacts of COVID long after the threat has gone, and return to whatever normality we choose or get, and the importance of finding spaces and help, professional if necessary, for ourselves and loved ones as we continue to move forward. And the last thing I'd like us to consider is a more global thing necessarily outside our church communities, but our wider communities in which our church exists, around social unrest. We know that during the first lockdown last year in the UK, nearly all crime fell to really minimal levels, although at the same time we know that some crimes like domestic violence rose. But London School of Economics recently did some research and found that violent crime and drug offences have now risen back to pre-pandemic levels, above pre-pandemic levels in deprived areas. And I think it's something that we as leaders in the church need to be aware of, that deprived areas which were already under pressure after long years of austerity will feel even greater pressure. And we will see young people who are not able to get employment, are not able to see a future for themselves, are seeing the dividing lines and they're on the wrong side of them for future prospects and for flourishing. And we will see a rise in crime. And I would love us as our churches look forward to also look outward and see what we can do proactively in our local communities to get out ahead of that. I'll just let you read that little quote. One of the most important things I think as leaders we need to do for ourselves and for those that we have care for is that we need to keep our vision, and vision gives us hope. It's a horizon by which we keep our balance when everything else is changing. And I think for us as people of faith communities, that vision, that horizon is always God-given. We need to seek it, and we need to work with our churches and church congregations to find where that vision is leading us by God. So I'd like to make a couple of suggestions, and you can take them or not, but just out of some of the things that we've been talking about, some of the options that you may want to think about within your own church, about how do we create space for people to have different speeds of coming out of the pandemic. I know that even in workplaces, some people are being told you have to be back in the office. You know, there will be a transition time of going from probably longer than we expect, going from online to do we have dual, do we have just in person. People will, if we expect people to be at the same pace we are, we will cause greater anxiety and stress for people who need longer. Secondly, is that how do we create spaces within our church community and wider community that we exist within for storytelling and processing once this is over? What creative ways can we come up with for acknowledging and honouring what people have gone through? And creating a time and space for us as church congregations to feel God's leading for that new shared vision for our congregation or presbytery or whatever group that we're elders in the hard-won lessons from this pandemic. And lastly, coming almost full circle back to where we were at the beginning, is creating spaces and equipping churches in its ability to notice brokenness and division, to be able to nurture relationships and community, to be able to navigate conflict and change in those discussions that are hard to have, whether it's about racism, whether it's about poverty, whatever it is, it's difficult to be able to navigate those things with graciousness, and to be able to nourish wholeness within ourselves and others. Those, I mean, they're broad strokes, but I think if we can be thinking about those as we emerge, then we are both caring for the relationships. We are enabling ourselves to be part of relationships that are healing, that are reconciling, not only to each other, but to God, to our planet, and finding a way out of this neutral, messy Kairos time to be the people of God in the post-pandemic world, which is hopefully a more reconciled one than we went into it with. I'm going to end, before we go to the next discussion group, with a prayer. Courage comes from the heart, and we are always welcomed by God, the choir, the heart of all being. We bear witness to our faith, knowing that we are called to live lives of courage, love, and reconciliation in the ordinary and extraordinary moments of each day. We bear witness too to our failures and our complicity in the fractures of the world. May we be courageous today. May we learn today. May we love today. Amen. So in this second breakout session, I'd like us to think about, in terms of our eldership roles, two things. One is thinking about some of the concepts and reflections and ideas that have been raised in the second session. Discuss ways that you might like to continue or start. Many of you will have been doing things in your own church anyway, on these lines, to continue supporting and strengthening relationships in your church and wider community as we emerge from the pandemic. And also what sort of resources and support you might need to enact some of the ideas you have. A lot of it will be internal things within the church, but sometimes you do need external support and resources. So it's just to identify those and to be able to take those forward coming out of this conference. So I think Hong Suk is going to put those both in the chat. And I hope you have a good discussion on those. Well, at least the start of a discussion. I'm sure it'll be much longer than 20 minutes, but